Our panel today is going to discuss not only the budget, but a number of issues related to the budget. So we're going to give each panelist 5 or 6 minutes to make comments. As Dave Taylor referenced earlier, there are note cards on your chairs. As we go through the panel presentations, if you have a question, please write your question down on the note card. Danny Mosel will collect the note cards, and then I'll pose the questions to the panelists. Since we are in the PMA building, we'll start with the president of the PMA, Dave Taylor.
Thank you very much, Loman. And I want to express my profound gratitude for both Senator Corman and Representative Cutler for being here today, for the not just the quality of their presentation, but the quality of their leadership, because I am very heartened by their clarity on the issues and their resolve about seeing these things through. And I guess to start off our conversation, the first and most important thing that I wanted to discuss is the energy sector. That here in Pennsylvania, that we have an opportunity that is without precedent. That not only do we now know that there are trillions, which is thousands of billions, which is millions of millions of cubic feet of natural gas under Pennsylvania. We now have the technology to be able to harvest that energy, to bring it to the surface, to turn it into wealth. It cannot be overstated. We must do this right. We must do this right to the maximum benefit of our Commonwealth, for our prosperity, because this is not a flash in the pan. We're talking here about something that is transformational, that will be jobs for generations, for our children, for our grandchildren, and also at the same time something that will greatly strengthen the position of our nation as a global leader. So it's imperative that in Harrisburg that we not foul it up, and sometimes that's asking a bit much of our decision makers here in the state capitol. But what I describe as the looter mentality, the smash and grab and take it now attitude that has been directed towards this natural gas opportunity is exactly the wrong way to go. For those who want to see this sector send more revenue to the Commonwealth, optimize conditions for growth. And again, at PMA, we are not shy. We want every single BTU of energy, every single rivet of infrastructure, and every single dollar of growth and investment out of this industry to uphold our prosperity and to pave the way for a brighter future. And so with that at the outset, I'm very pleased to see our legislative allies holding the line, because please remember, no ground can be given. Any change in the system of taxation on the energy industry will undo Act 13, the existing law with the existing impact tax, which is structured to direct money to the communities where the activity takes place. And then what portion comes to Harrisburg goes specifically to the state agencies that oversee the industry, whether it's the Department of Environmental Protection, PennDOT, the Emergency Management Agency, that it doesn't just go into a slush fund, that these are dedicated to specific purposes. If we add any new tax, the impact tax is revoked, and that it creates, again, a very negative dynamic where for the folks in Harrisburg that to look upon the energy sector as a beast of burden to be whipped, rather than a garden to be tended. For those who want the maximum amount of revenue for the Commonwealth, for Pete's sake, let it grow.
Thank you very much, David. And next, we have Kevin Shivers, who is the Executive State Director of the National Federation of Independent Business for Pennsylvania. Mr. Shivers.
Thank you, Loman, and good morning, everyone. The governor, back in January, told us all in his inaugural address that he was a new governor. It was a new day. He was going to govern a different kind of way than we've seen here in Harrisburg in recent years. And I think once the governor finishes completing all of the priorities of Governor Ed Rendell, I'm sure at that point we'll start seeing some of these new ideas. But really, this budget, I think, is the continuation of that last year of the Rendell administration. It's just a mix of new and higher spending, new and higher taxes to pay for it. I think what we're watching here is a failure of leadership on the part of this governor to close the sale. That's why here we are at the end of June. Republicans and Democrats, they're passing a budget. They're going to give it to the governor's desk, and all we've heard thus far is the governor's going to veto it. Well, how do we get to this point? Well, for starters, I think, this is a surprise budget for us all. The governor campaigned, as a moderate Democrat that, he was going to reduce taxes on the middle class. He was going to reduce taxes on consumers. We were going to start spending on the right priorities. So the budget that the governor proposed in February or in March was a far cry from the proposal that we heard on the campaign trail. And for starters, when you just look at the sheer size and magnitude to this proposal, a 21% increase in taxes, a 14% increase in spending. And to put that in perspective, under Governor Rendell, in any of the 8 budgets that Governor Rendell enacted, spending only rose about 5%. So now we're looking at a 15% increase in spending and $8 billion in new and higher taxes. The governor has told us all, in his mind, he doesn't care where he gets the money from. He just believes that we need more money. Under the governor's proposal, he wants to tax income. He wants to tax business. He wants to tax our savings. There's a proposal that would actually tax the money that's held by banks. Ultimately, it's all of our deposits. The governor wants to tax natural gas and destroy our, the most effective, most powerful industry that Pennsylvania has today. And he wants to do it for a variety of reasons that he hasn't ever actually been able to pin down and share with lawmakers. And it's, there's been a lot of talk about that this is just a partisan process, that Republicans are delivering a budget to the governor. Well, remember that Democrats resoundingly defeated the governor's proposal just several weeks ago. 203-0, the governor's proposal was defeated. And it's dramatic. The other issue that I think it's important is that when you look at voters and their attitudes towards the governor's proposal, the Americans for Prosperity teamed up with Susquehanna Polling and Research. We found 90% of voters would prefer that lawmakers look to cut spending before they raise taxes. So in effect, what the General Assembly is doing right now in looking to privatize the liquor system, looking to reform our pension system, making real changes in how government is paying for a variety of these programs and services, that's the message I think that voters were looking for in last November. It's certainly, what the governor was campaigning on, a new way of doing things. This certainly is a new way of doing things, I think, on the part of this General Assembly, actually finding ways to reduce the size and cost of government, and to do that first before you look at any revenue increases. So my own opinion is I think the governor needs to weigh very carefully his decision to just arbitrarily veto this budget, because I think there ultimately could be backlash from the voters going forward. Thank you.
And actually, I do, with all respect to my colleagues and the legislative leaders who came before, the vote in the State House was not 193-0. It was, in fact, 0 to 193.
Want me to jump in, Loman?
Well, what I'm going to do is ask Joe if he'll come up here and advance the slide presentation.
I've
You got her?
I've got a clicker.
You'll get it? They can get it from back there and get us to we have to get to your presentation before that clicker will work.
Very good.
So we will do that. Our next speaker will be Matthew Briette. Matt, of course, is president of the Commonwealth Foundation. How does David phrase it? Pennsylvania's foremost public policy.
Pennsylvania's foremost free market think tank.
Yes. We hear that every week. Well, we have a nice picture of Dave Taylor.
I can start, Loman.
There we go. You're all
right.
set.
So before I got into what I say the more juvenile world of politics, I was a middle school history teacher. I did that for 7 years before I got into this business. So I am the first one to say that money matters in education. I didn't do it for free. It didn't, our schools didn't exist without resources. So when we talk about education, a lot of folks think, oh, you're just for not putting money into education. You just don't want the taxpayers to have to support education. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I think most people recognize that education is critical for us, but we want quality for what we're spending in education. If you believed the campaign rhetoric, you would think that Pennsylvania is one of the worst funded states when it comes to our public schools, right? We have underfunding that is the mantra and the drumbeat in this budget season, that we underfund our public schools. But again, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, Pennsylvania, on a per pupil basis, spends $3,700 more than the national average. Even our poorest school districts exceed the national average in terms of funding. The question isn't about whether we spend enough money in public education, it's how we're spending it. And in fact, I want to destruct some of these and deconstruct some of the myths that Governor Wolf is perpetuating, and those who profit from more spending in education, to look at these charts. I'm a picture guy, so I've got a lot of pictures up here and I pass them out to you. School district expenditures, and it is important that we recognize this. How many have heard about the $1 billion cut in education? Yeah, we heard that a little bit. Where did that cut come from? Was it here, the state legislators? I think it was all Gordon Denlinger. That's why he left. He felt so bad about cutting $1 billion. It was exactly as it was stated before. The printing presses in Washington stopped. This occurred under who? Governor Corbett? No, Governor Ed Rendell. These were his last 2 years in office that we put $1 billion in federal stimulus money. And you can see when that ended, 2011 and 12. They're on the chart behind me. It started in 08, or we saw it at the beginning of the 09-10 school year. And you can see, while revenues were declining in every other part of government, we're juicing this with fake money, with printed money from Washington, D.C. And I remember elected officials, even Governor Rendell himself, sent letters to school districts and said, don't put this into your general operations. Put this into one-time expenditures. But what did they do? They went on a hiring spree. They hired a bunch of teachers, brought more, cooked that into their ongoing expenditures, and then blamed the legislature, the governor, for the job losses because they hired people that they never should have hired. In fact, while student enrollment had declined by over 25,000 students overall over a 10-year period, we added over 33,000 employees into the public school system. I mean, what business is losing customers but is hiring more workers? Nobody. Yet that's precisely what we were doing in education. And then we say it's an underfunding problem. Can you guys go to the next one, or do I need to? Okay, very good. Thank you. So let's look at some of these numbers here, what we're talking about. Is the state being irresponsible in sending more money to the public schools? Absolutely not. Every year, more money is going into public education. In fact, you may even hear the governor say that we're dead last in terms of the state share. Well, that's got absolutely nothing to do with how much money we are spending. In fact, when you look at the state contribution, we are middle of the pack. We are 25th out of 50 states in terms of the amount of money that is going to our public schools. At the local level, we are 7th highest in the nation. And when you combine that all together, Pennsylvania outspends 39 other states on a per pupil basis, $3,700 more than the national average. And it is these revenues you can see have gone up and up and up and exceed today where we were at even with the federal stimulus money. So today we're spending more money in public education than ever, yet we continue to be beaten over the head that we need to pay more, that we need to tax natural gas, that we need a PIT increase or a sales tax increase to pay for our underfunded public schools. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is what is consuming more and more revenue, not only in public education, but every level of government, from municipalities to the state. Look at this. This is incredible. This is what is consuming and why we have not just municipalities talking about potential bankruptcy, but school districts saying, we just do not have the tax base to be able to pay for this, because this spike that you see behind me is not stopping. We're going up, I believe it's another 600 million next year. We got to add another 600 million so you can put another spike on this. And then after that, another 600 or 800 million. Yet we have a governor that says there's no problem. We don't need to change the system. This is a problem. Then the last one, while we continue to be told we're not paying enough in public education, look at what they're accumulating in reserves. Over $4 billion is in reserves. Yet they say we need more tax revenue. We need to raise taxes while they sit on over $4 billion in reserve money. And then hammer others for doing the same and then demand more from the taxpayers. The reality is that Pennsylvania doesn't have a public school underfunding crisis. It's got a spending crisis. And until we deal with the spending side of the ledger, doesn't matter whether we're taking out a property tax or sales tax, we're going to keep harming the taxpayer in this process. And we're not, unfortunately, going to be helping the kids. Thank you.
A reminder, if you have questions, please write them on cards, pass them to the ends of the aisle. Danny will collect them, and we'll do question and answers after we hear from our next panelist, Gene Barr, who is the president of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Gene?
Hey, thank you, Lemon. Before I talk, I'm going to talk a little bit today about the corporate tax side in some more detail, but I did want to touch on a couple things that were said to reinforce what was previously said. Matt talked a little bit about education spend and what happened during those infamous federal stimulus years. During that time, I was on the Stimulus Oversight Commission, or as we got out on that commission and found out that we didn't have much say, and it was either the late Senator Mike Wall or Representative Brian Ellis, I forget, took to calling it the Stimulus Hindsight Commission because we realized we couldn't have any impact on anything. But it was exactly as Matt said. During that time, schools were told, do not put this into your operating budget. They were told, and in fact, literally the two things that they use, and I was in the meetings when the Department of Education came in and presented and said, we're telling every district not to do this. They were told, do things like, and these are not just, these were actual examples, put in a new science lab. Do a tutorial, a tutoring program, mentoring program for your teachers. Do not put these dollars into your general fund. Now, the problem is, unfortunately, at the same time, the last 2 years of the Rendell budgets actually cut the state share of education, which is really interesting because a couple of years ago, PSEA put out a study claiming that it proved Tom Corbett cut $1 billion from education. The reality is, a couple minutes that day went on and looked, and it said, talked about how horrible the last 2 years of the Rendell years were. I said, oh, that doesn't really fit the narrative, does it? So it was kind of interesting. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is something that our legislative guest here touched on a bit today. For those of you, I look around the room, I see a lot of people with whom I have lobbied for a couple of the decades I've been in Harrisburg here. And if you remember, a few years ago, we had something that everybody joked about. It was called the fake budget. Everybody remembered that. We'd all get into the late May, early June. The House would pass the fake budget. We'd all joke about it because they'd go in, they'd put everything in. The budget would explode by 25% over the previous year because everybody got to put in every Little League field they ever wanted back home, right? It would go over to the Senate, and the Senate would strip it out, and we'd come up with something that worked. Well, the reality is what happened a couple of weeks ago was almost like the fake budget. Everybody wanted to put in the spend that they wanted to do without voting for the taxes, and the reality is the question was called, and it was a 0 to 193 vote, as Dave said, not 193 to 0. It was 0 to 193. What I want to do is talk a little bit because there's also some tremendous myths that we've heard, whether we're talking about severance or business taxes or whatever that is. And those myths are things like, well, corporations really don't care that much about taxes. They look at other things. Now, for a number of years, about 13, I worked for a small mom and pop oil company called BP. You might have heard of them. Part of that time, I did some acquisition work when I was at the U.S. headquarters in Cleveland. For those of you who were around, and I see a few of my colleagues here who were here during those years, in 1991, during one of the real bad budget years we had here, as I recall, I think it was a $1 billion shortfall in a budget that was much smaller, and we raised taxes about $3 billion or slightly north of that in order to close the $1 billion gap. The necessity was, well, we got to go get this because so-and-so needs a new bridge for his or her vote, and so-and-so needs a new fire hall, and so wants this for that. So we had to go raise taxes $3 billion. And it was huge increases. As I recall, corporate net income tax went to something like 12.25%. The CSFT, which, knock on wood, we're done with this year. Personal income taxes were hiked. This is all, again, 1991, ancient history for a lot of the younger folks in the room. At the time, as I mentioned, I was in retail marketing in BP. And when the word came back about what this meant, I remember being in a meeting with our senior vice president of retail marketing who was told, okay, here's what the Pennsylvania legislature did, and this is what we've raised taxes to over here. And his comment was, fine, that's the end of our direct investment in Pennsylvania. Now, at the time, BP was headquartered in Ohio, next state over. They had a refinery outside Philadelphia. Coincidentally, it was the one I started my career with BP at. They owned a string of service stations that were branded BP across Pennsylvania. They owned a string of car care facilities in western PA. Those of you from Pittsburgh might remember ProCare. That was a BP operation. They owned terminals. They owned all kinds of things here in Pennsylvania. And it took a few years. They're gone. The only thing BP has today is a small investment in a wind farm, which is a totally different operation, a totally different business operation now. Everything that was there is gone. If you see a BP station, it's not owned by BP. They are not BP employees. They simply sell them a product in exchange for letting them use the logo. BP has, other than that small investment, has no more direct investment in this Commonwealth, and they've been gone for a number of years. That's the impact when you do that, because what needs to be understood is companies compete against each other, absolutely. Companies compete internally for investment. And what our VP of retail marketing knew at the time was when he saw those tax numbers, he knew that there was no way that when we had to go to the bank, our bank to get borrowing and to get money to do buys in the U.S. was in London. We had to go to our Bank of London, BP, and say, we got this great opportunity. It's a string of service stations in Pennsylvania. We could never make that work because the guy from Australia or the guy from Belgium or the guy from wherever is going to come in. He or she's going to get a better return on what they can get for the same $500 million that BP's going to invest. We were dead, and they knew that it was not going to work anymore. So when you hear somebody talk about the big myth of taxes don't matter, they do. Yes, workforce matters. Yes, quality of life matters. All of those things matter. But it doesn't matter if you can't get a better return. As my old refinery manager used to say, hey, if the best I can do is 2% return on my money, I'm better off going out and buying something else and selling the refinery and taking the money and sticking it in there. I make a better return than what we can get. And that's what you have to think about. And that's what businesses have to think about. So what we look here, when we look at what the governor has proposed, I've had some people who say, hey, how can business not like this? And this is the way that it was pitched. How can business not like cutting the corporate net income tax rate, which is currently the highest effective rate in the United States at 9.99? Iowa has a higher rate, but theirs is graduated. So we call it the highest effective rate. When you add it to the U.S. rate, which is the highest in the world, arguably Pennsylvania has the worst corporate tax structure in the world. How can you not like cutting it in half? Let me tell you a couple of reasons why we cannot like cutting it in half. First off, for those of us who've lived through the capital stock and franchise issue for the last 15, 16 years, I'll be blunt, a lot of my members simply don't have the faith that this Commonwealth will follow through and cut it to 4.99 in exchange for what we've been asked for, which I'll define in a minute, is mandatory unitary combined reporting. There's not a lot of faith that we're going to see that 4.99 or that we're going to be able to stick at 4.99 because it's too easy to change that. So that's a major problem. Second, what wasn't mentioned is that we have, along with New Hampshire, the worst treatment of business business losses, how you treat from a tax basis business losses in the U.S. The governor has proposed going backwards on that. We made some minor changes over the last few years. That net operating loss carry forward is a huge issue for many companies, particularly those that are cyclical. What he would like to do is take and impose something called mandatory unitary combined reporting. Shorthand, Pennsylvania right now is a separate company reporting state. If you're Matt Briette Inc. and you've got an operation in Pennsylvania, you figure out what you make in Pennsylvania and you pay taxes on that. If you're Matt Briette Inc., under the new proposal, and you also have facilities in Ohio and North Carolina and Iowa, the Department of Revenue figures out a way of creating a unitary group and taxes everything based on that. You might not like how they define that. Iowa may say, oh, no, those dollars do not accrue to Pennsylvania, they stay in Iowa, and you could wind up being double taxed. The reality is it's a very complicated scheme. California was one of the first to implement it. They've either just finished their litigation from 30 years or they still have cases that have been litigated for 3 decades over this because it is so confusing, so complicated, and no one knows exactly what a unitary group is going to look like. Now, supposedly this is done in order to address the issue of the Delaware holding issue. Delaware holding issue has nothing to do with combined reporting. There are companies who would be hurt by combined reporting that don't have what's called a passive investment. And the analogy is, if you find ants in your kitchen, you burn the kitchen down. Yeah, you get rid of the ants, but you cause a heck of a lot more damage. That's using combined reporting to get a passive investment. And the reality is we solved this a couple years ago. The House gave Department of Revenue additional powers to go after companies that are abusing the passive investment that we've heard so much about. So this discussion about combined reporting to get at Delaware holding companies or Colorado holding or any state where you might do that is completely off. It's simply a way of trying to get more dollars. And the reality is when the other tremendously misleading number that you hear is, and is tossed around all the time, and some of our friends on the other side of this issue will use a different number every day. Oh, 73% of companies don't pay any taxes in Pennsylvania. Oh, it's 68%. It's 77%. Heard somebody on TV one time said, corporations don't pay any taxes in Pennsylvania. Okay, I'd love to see those numbers. The reality is that even states that have done combined reporting, that have moved from a separate company reporting to combined reporting, where they take all of the assets and make a unitary group, Utah is an example. In Utah, 73% of corporations a couple years ago did not pay any taxes. This is a reality. There are corporations, as many of you know, who have been more engaged in this than I, who are set up not to make money. They're set up as a holding for shielding purposes, for real estate purposes, et cetera. And as an example, give you, I don't know whether they did this, but it certainly seems reasonable to me. If you're Walt Disney 30, 40 years ago, and you're buying a lot of land in Florida to create a brand new tourist attraction, you probably don't want to set up everything as a Walt Disney Corporation. You might set up one as Pluto Inc. and one as Duck Inc. and so that nobody gets the attention on that. Well, all of those corporations are not set up to make money. They're set up for a business enterprise operation. So all of those are not set up to make money. The other reality about companies that don't pay anything, guess what? A lot of companies don't make money in a given year. So they're not going to pay taxes on that. Some of them, to be blunt, are out of business. They're gone. They've left Pennsylvania. They're no longer operating whatsoever. It's, the analogy is, the voting rolls in a given area where you've got people who've been dead for 2 or 3 years who are still listed on the voting rolls. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And when people say, how can you not take this deal on cutting the corporate net income tax rate in half and getting combined reporting, the last thing that I say to people is this. If the U.S. government said to you, we're going to cut your personal rate in half, but we're also going to tax your 401k, is that a good deal or not? You got to run the numbers, don't you? And it depends on how that's taxed, when it's taxed. Are they taxing everything? So you really have to run the numbers. It may or may not be a good idea, and that's a situation here why we have not jumped all over this corporate tax picture here. So with that, I guess we're happy to answer some questions.
Let me just say something about what Gene said. It's probably me who said corporations don't pay any taxes, because they don't. I mean, ultimately, people pay taxes, right? When we say, oh, we want to stick it to the natural gas industry, really you're sticking it to yourself in the form of higher energy costs, or if you are employed, you're going to have fewer benefits, lower increases, or even lost jobs. I mean, those always get passed on to people. I mean, the idea, oh, I want to raise taxes on your house. Okay, fine, get my house to pay those. I pay those taxes. I mean, yeah, they're always, what's
Yes.
that? No, not all taxes, of course.
Could I
but,
address that
yeah,
a little bit?
yeah.
Because what the gentleman said is correct. Let me state it this way. Any business operation, be it a corporation, a pass-through, or whatever, will seek to pass through every cost of doing business and every tax. I can sit here and create, it would take too much time. Well, actually, it wouldn't take that much time, but we can talk about it later. Situations where business cannot recover a tax that's on them. So it is fair to state that a business will attempt to recover their cost of doing business, which includes any taxes that have been put on them. They may or may not be successful. That's a little better way.
Yeah,
And isn't
yeah,
that different,
yeah.
much different from what you're
Right.
saying? When taxes
Yeah, we're not arguing,
we're
I'm just,
not
just
arguing.
recognizing that
Correct.
this idea, if we can tax somebody else and not pay the consequences.
But
there are
that's why, to
consequences.
go back to my other analogy, why BP's not here, because
Yeah.
they were not,
That's right.
they were not confident they would be able to pass on all those taxes, and it was no longer a competitive place for them to do business, so they left. They would attempt to do it, but they were not confident in their full ability to do it.
Yeah, and
Now,
if I
in
could,
light of all of this, what are any chances, Dave, Kevin, any chances of getting any sort of a reduction in the corporate net income tax, which is one of the highest, if not the highest in the country? And will the capital stock and franchise tax actually finally go away?
okay, all right, I'll lead up on that. Yes, I do believe that after 15 years, we will see the completion of the 10-year phase out of the capital stock and franchise tax. Yeah, it's worth applauding. It's worth applauding. The CSFT is a stupid, job-killing tax because it is a tax on business assets. It's not related to profitability, so you pay it even in years when your company loses money. Most states have either a business income tax or an assets tax. They don't have both. Pennsylvania's had both. That Governor Wolf is not pressing to change the law to prevent the rate from reaching zero on December 31 of this year, and at that point, for that tax being expunged from the books. That is the one piece of good news in the course of this budget debate. Now, beyond that, regarding, pro-growth business tax relief, I don't expect to see it because that would have to be a priority that's co-equal with, with spending increases. And, call me old-fashioned, but, the way that you cut taxes is by cutting taxes, not by, unleashing the law of unintended consequences by engaging in massive tax shifts. And so, again, we need to have a steady march towards pro-growth business tax relief, but in this environment, I just don't think that's possible.
My opinion is I think the governor's zeal to reduce corporate net income taxes it rings hollow with all of the other proposals.
Yeah.
The
It's the
governor
cheese
is,
in the mousetrap.
yeah, the governor is proposing to tax the middle class. Governor is proposing to tax seniors. The governor is proposing to tax businesses large and small. You can't increase spending by 14% without taxing somebody, and the governor's plan taxes everybody.
Gene?
The reality is on CNI, we're back where we were for 8 years during the Ed Rendell administration. For those of you who were around then recall, Rendell administration it was literally the first week decided combined reporting was going to be one of their top priorities. And every time we raised the need to cut that 9.99 corporate net income tax, the response was, great, let's do combined reporting. So I think we're back into that stalemate process again, where nothing will get done, even though everyone acknowledges that 9.99 is completely uncompetitive. Talk to people in DCED who are seeking to attract businesses to locate in PA, and it doesn't matter whether they're in a Republican or a Democrat administration. The reality is when they go out to ABC Corporation and they ask, what's your CNI? Well, it's 9.99. Well, okay, thanks very much. We're going to go look somewhere else. That happens all too often.
We have a question. Matt talked a lot about public school funding for K-12 public education. The question comes up about out-of-control spending at colleges and universities. Of course, this is an issue right now. The spending that we have on colleges and universities continues to skyrocket at many multiples. The rate of inflation, student debt is increasing. Anything that can be done to rein in that spending Any thoughts on that from anybody in the panel?
Well, I do believe that the bubble in higher ed is going to burst, and that's actually a good thing, because there needs to be some kind of rationalization of a process that is completely out of control. There are a number of things that need to be done. First of all, we need the federal government to stop loving it to death by subsidizing it so much, which then, it's the dog chasing its tail, that it becomes more and more expensive. Those institutions also, need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and, to talk about the readiness for their graduates to succeed in life, including success in the marketplace. In the K through 12 education, the business community overall is very concerned about the disconnect between the goals towards which the system pushes our student versus the actual opportunities that exist, out in the marketplace. That we have, an awful lot of, underemployed sociology majors and not enough welders. And again, by stigmatizing any choice that a young person might make other than chasing the golden ticket of a 4-year degree, that we wind up, really distorting the economy and shortchanging our young people who might otherwise pursue one of these very good paying careers in manufacturing, in the skilled trade. And I would just also note that there is nothing that prevents a person who pursues, that kind of industrial work from being a complete and cultured person. Again, that's a false dichotomy, and that we should stop stigmatizing people who work with their hands.
Matt, you had a,
Yeah.
and then Jim.
Couldn't say a whole lot more what David said. I do believe that bubble is coming. I think it's being driven in large part through advances in technology. I say this as someone who's one of the more, well, there's a lot of, I think, overeducated people here that have lots of letters after their name, but I'm one of them as well. And I think, to David's point, we have driven people into getting an education, as opposed to seeking out a career that may or may not require college attendance. And I see my friends from Connections Academy, where 4 of my kids attend, and what this is doing to revolutionize how we deliver education for both the people who are providing it, teachers, as well as those who are receiving it. I think we're definitely seeing that in higher ed as well. And then once that bubble bursts, I think we're going to have really a resetting of how we deliver education across the board. And I hope we have that sooner than later, because I think we're hurting kids and people in school as a result of the resistance to a lot of these opportunities and changes we're seeing.
Gene?
Yeah, let me just quickly, I should have said this before. The one who I said corporations don't pay any taxes was not Matt. I was referring to someone else who believes they truly don't pay or are liable for tax. So it wasn't you.
She's the chief of staff to the
I'm not going to,
governor.
no. It was someone else even prior to that. It was someone prior to that. I saw a number the other day that said, I believe there are now 18 institutions of higher learning in this country where room, board, and tuition is over $70,000. That's for an undergrad degree. So I completely concur. I think that more and more parents are beginning, look, like all of us, most parents say, hey, my kids are going to a 4-year school. I think there's more and more, as was talked about, that is this relook at, do we really need to do that? Looking at the jobs that are out there, and there is one thing that we've done a tremendous job in education. There's a number of things, but one of them that we has been really stigmatizing, as Dave said, the trades. We did it for years. We denigrated them. We always talk about the kids who go there's not being good enough. In reality, years ago, those of our age, auto shop were the kids who went in and worked with their hands and had grease all over them. Now they're some of the most technologically advanced people out there because everything's computers. The world changes, and we need to recognize that and come up with efficient, effective ways of educating and of training our kids, because every single one of us up here is aware of companies that are hiring and can't find the people they need because we can't find the kids that have the skills that are necessary for those jobs. So,
Now, in terms of sort of government picking winners and losers, there's an RFP, a request for proposal, apparently being put out by the Department of Community and Economic Development to spend up to $30 million for solar projects in Pennsylvania. As we've heard here this morning, we're the Saudi Arabia of the natural gas industry. Any comments on how and why the administration would be pushing this?
If I could please, just,
I'm shocked you have something to say.
yeah,
about this.
I do. The governor's, the Wolf administration has in it several prominent people who have been leaders in the green movement and have been involved with this, fetishization of, so-called renewable energy, even though these energy sources are inherently inefficient, low yield, boutique energy sources that are very, very costly. They deliver, they deliver power by the thimbleful when, especially for industrial purposes, we need it by the hydrant blast. The governor's tax plan to plunder the energy sector would not only impose all of these, new costs on natural gas production, it would also divert hundreds of millions of dollars in new subsidies for their preferred energy sources. So we're going to take an energy sector that works, we're going to put new burdens on it, and then we're going to take the proceeds from that to try to subsidize into existence another sector. I mean, it's just, it's almost as though they're trying to live out President Reagan's joke that government has a very simple view of business. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. I mean, that actually appears to be the Wolf administration's energy plan.
Kevin.
This is just, another jaw-dropping example of crony capitalism. And, and when the governor proposed his severance tax plan, one of the things left me, well, okay, why aren't we taxing timber? Why aren't we taxing coal? Why aren't we taxing windmills? Why aren't we taxing solar? Why are we picking on the natural gas industry? Here we have an industry that is standing up on its own 2 feet. It's not asking for money from state government. There clearly is demand for the product, but yet this administration not only wants to tax it to death, but then they want to take a portion of those revenues and then to plow that into some of these risky, questionable, unyielding energy sources. It's astonishing to me just the wrong-headedness of this type of approach.
If I could just add to this and actually even expand it, I think the term Kevin used is precisely accurate. We have crony capitalism, and we've got it beyond just the green energy. Pennsylvania has been the biggest spender in the country in both total dollars and on a per capita basis on so-called economic development. It's essentially corporate welfare. We reward those who hire high-priced lobbyists to go up here and get handouts and subsidies. And this is a bipartisan problem that we have got to address. I mean, we could balance the budget easily without cuts if we got rid of the $1.5 billion that we've identified as corporate welfare, subsidies. It's not just to the green, our own little cylinders here in Pennsylvania. And I always like, as I drive the turnpike out to Pittsburgh, count the number of windmills that are actually operating, when I go through. That's usually more are not than are. But this goes beyond just the green energy sector, which we've then mandated a market, of course. But we need to end this. This should be an easy thing for Democrats and Republicans to say, you know what, this is not the proper use of taxpayer money to subsidize what are frequently big corporations, big businesses that are taking on our small mom and pop enterprises right here in Pennsylvania.
Gene?
It is, as many of you know, we have had a mandate to sell various kinds of alternative energy since 2004, I believe November 2004, specifically targeted towards solar. From our perspective, we believe that there ought to be, and you've heard this slogan many times, there needs to be an all of the above. I have companies who take advantage of wind and solar. Some of that, yes, is because of some of the programs at the federal and state level that are out there, but they do, and there are certain arrays, the tops of large, flat facilities, where it makes sense. But I think those who argue for this, and we hear a lot of people who are opposing natural gas and saying use wind and solar, make it base load. that is a ridiculous statement, and we've gotten back and forth into that. One, we oppose mandates as, from the chamber side, we think that all of these things could be deployed until there's a breakthrough in battery technology. Solar becomes very difficult to utilize. But if you want to sit for those people who want to take wind and solar as baseload, I ran the numbers one time when someone made that comment, and they were disturbed because we made this, but they also said that acknowledged it was true. If you wanted to take typical size nuclear-fired plant, coal-fired plant, natural gas-fired plant, and substitute wind power for that and use that as baseload. This is an accurate statement, not hyperbole. The size of the landmass that would be necessary would be 1 mile wide, and it would stretch from Paoli to Meadville, Pennsylvania. That's an equivalency, and the other side has acknowledged that's the case. Because the reality is, when you look at energy, there are three pieces. There's the price of it, there's how efficient it is, and there's the economic performance. And each of them has, whether you look at nuke, at coal, at natural gas, at wind and solar, each has pluses and minuses based on that. And our perspective is the consumer ought to be able to look at that and state, hey, you know what, for this particular application, solar makes sense to us. For this, a wind may make sense. The reality is Pennsylvania is not particularly situated for, say, solar or wind as compared to some of the plain states or some of the Southwest states relative to exposure to sun. So let the consumer make those decisions about what makes sense for them.
Real quickly, Kevin, and then we have one final question we want to get to.
And to Gene's point, it's just a failure of thought in terms of, how are we looking strategically at these energy sources? And, to the point about, how many cloudy days do we have? We're gonna go long on solar. But it's amazing to me just the lack of depth into the thinking that goes into our natural gas industry. All we're talking about is how much money can we raise from this one particular energy source, but we're not thinking about, the upstream and downstream jobs that are related to supporting it. We've been talking about the location of the natural gas, the ethane cracker facility out in western Pennsylvania. There are going to be significant economic development impacts, both on the upside, all of the supplier companies that are going to be providing materials, raw materials for that facility, but then also on the downstream where you've got people using those materials to create other manufacturing. We've lost our manufacturing thought, or the idea that if a government society makes stuff, that society is actually going to do well. Instead, we're just looking at, okay, who's making money and how can we get more of it? And it's just a very short-sighted view. And this whole proposal with solar energy, windmills, whatever, it's to that point. We're not thinking beyond how can we just get that money, or how can we just promote? We're not thinking beyond how can we build our economy around those industries, and natural gas is that one energy source.
Now, let's talk, we have one final question. The questioner actually starts out with a statement that no tax should leave somebody homeless. Now, obviously, we're referring to property taxes, which, by the way, it will shock you, is different from what the governor told the Pocono Record a couple of weeks ago, where he was questioned about people losing their homes because of property taxes. And he said, well, that's the cost of doing business. So some people are going to lose their homes. Should people be able to lose their homes because of not being able to pay property taxes? And very quickly, each of you, your response to proposals to eliminate school property taxes and replace them dollar for dollar with increases in sales and income taxes.
You know what? Anybody who believes that the government, when it promises you it's going to eliminate property taxes if you just let it tax other things, if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. Remember back, 15, 18 years ago, we had the settlement with the tobacco companies, and we were going to take all of this tobacco money and we're going to put it in a lockbox, and that was going to help people who smoked and had all of these health-related issues. Well, guess what? We're spending that money 10 times over on a variety of programs. Take a look at the capital stock and franchise tax. That was supposed to have been eliminated after 9 years, and here we are, 16, 17 years later, and we're still talking about the what-ifs. Anytime a politician comes to you and promises that they're going to eliminate a tax on you, and, we're just going to do it, oh my, if seriously, I have real estate that I can sell you if you believe that that's going to happen. But seriously, if you take a look at the governor's proposal and other proposals that are out there, none of them truly eliminate property taxes. There's still mechanisms that are in place to allow local school districts to increase property taxes. And it's just so disingenuous that we're talking about such a massive tax shift, but we're not providing any real protections for taxpayers. It's disappointing.
I'll say that from a tax policy standpoint, absolutely, we need to, I think we need to revamp a lot of our taxation in that we have a principle that we can apply to pretty much anything. It's that people should pay for the government that they use. Okay? So let's apply this. Let's say, all right, how do we pay for our roads? I think our gas tax and tolling are legitimate ways that we essentially pay for the government that we're using. I drive more, I pay more in those taxes. It doesn't apply when we're talking about our schools, right? I mean, these are not, we don't pay for them because I've, based upon the number of kids I put into the system. We pay for them because of the price of my house or how much value I've got. We have to refigure this. Now, that said, the challenge with this, I think, is what Kevin has said. We're talking about shifting billions of dollars. I want to control those monies. We need to talk about how we're, the spending side of the equation, as opposed to which pocket of the taxpayer we're going to pick. Because until we address how we're spending and what we're doing on that front, there will never be enough. And we might take it out, stop taking it out of the back pocket of property taxes, but we're going to be taking out of some pocket somewhere. And it will get to these types of dynamics that Gene was talking about. Do you then, when we are the 10th highest spending in public education in the state, and we're going to maintain that, what are the ramifications and consequences of extracting over $10 billion more out of somewhere? It comes from somewhere. There will be negative consequences. Are we willing to live with them? So far, the General Assembly has said no. I mean, that's the challenge, is that shifting this type of revenue is just such a heavy lift that they just haven't been able to do it. Even if I would like for us to see that kind of a tax policy shift, it has just been too difficult to be able to move those kinds of revenues around.
Gene?
Let me answer this on a couple different levels. First off, from the perspective of the chamber and who we represent, the thing that we would state is that until we fix those things that are driving property taxes higher, and paramount among that, what Matt showed here, which is pensions, until you fix pensions, you forget about it. I mean, this is going to be a tremendous road to ruin until we do that, fixing pensions as well as many of the other mandates school districts are faced with. Let me state something else that probably is a bit controversial. To be blunt, we have too many school districts. We have 500 school districts in this Commonwealth. That's too many. And until we figure out how we develop efficiencies by combining some or figuring out how we put some of them together. Look, I grew up in what is one of the worst performing districts in this Commonwealth. I grew up in Chester Upland School District, and for a long time, Upland, a little borough next to it, had its own school district. We had 2 little elementary schools. I forget how many kids went there. I went to the parochial school, and we paid somebody to take our kids into high school. That is not an effective way of doing this. Until we figure out how we knock down some of the number of the districts, we're not going to get, in my view, the quality that we need. We're not going to get the economic efficiencies that we need. We have proposals now, or we have programs in place now that can address people who have a real financial problem. And I think those are the ones we want to look at. Someone's really in danger of losing their house. I believe the number is, if your income is under $30,000 a year, you can go and put your property taxes in abeyance until you sell the property. Now, I realize that means your heirs don't make as much money, but I'm not sure that's what we ought to be looking at, making sure that someone inherits the full value of your house. The proposals that we've seen from the chamber perspective in many cases shift the burden from the residential class onto the business class. A lot of these proposals simply make that shift without giving the appropriate breaks to business. And let's be honest, in many cases, business leases a property, therefore they would not be able to take advantage of it. And finally, this is kind of where I come down on a bigger public policy perspective as a parent, as a native of Pennsylvania. I want to be really careful about how we proceed on this, because in order to go in and say, regardless of your income, we're going to cut your property tax bill, we're going to raise the personal income tax. Let's use the example of 2 people, they're retired, They have a defined benefit, they don't pay tax on their pensions, and we're gonna lift off your property tax, we're gonna raise the PIT, but don't worry, that's not gonna impact you because you don't pay it. And we're gonna give a tremendous benefit to people who in many cases are pretty well off, and we're gonna turn around and say, as a state that's the oldest, or second oldest in the US, now we're gonna start taxing, hey, that 25-year-old couple over there starting out that rents an apartment, we're gonna increase your PIT. You won't get any benefit, at least not in the short term, of the property tax because we are going to not be able to help you with that. Or some of the proposals give a little bit of money. And under some of the other proposals we've seen, we're gonna begin taxing under the governor's plan, your diapers, your daycare, everything else. You wanna make Pennsylvania older, that's, in my view, a phenomenal way of doing it. If you wanna hurt young people, I think we ought to be looking at who truly needs the help. And again, starting with that is, address the things that make property taxes higher than we believe they ought to be. When you do that, then start figuring out what makes sense. But let's not penalize people like my kids starting out. I'm not willing to have my kids pay my property tax. in all
If I
honesty.
could just tag on to that, Gene, because I think what you're talking about is that unless we strike the root of the problems, we're never going to solve them. We'll just be dealing with the symptoms. The root of all of these problems, whether we're talking about a bigger budget spend, more tax from the natural gas industry, why are my property taxes going up? It goes to those who profit, who benefit from bigger government, from higher taxes, from more spending. And until we recognize that it is the public employee unions that are driving the discussion, that are driving the agenda of Governor Wolf, you look across the board, what is it that he is doing? He's opposed to things like getting rid of the liquor stores, joining the other 48 states, entering not just the 21st century, but let's enter the 20th century in Pennsylvania. Yet he stands firmly against that. Pension reform. We know the private sector did this decades ago. They recognized that this was the only way we could make sure that we provide retirement income for people, that defined benefits are unsustainable, they're unaffordable, and we cannot stay in these systems, yet he stands squarely against them. He wants more money for public education when we're the 10th highest spending in the state and says we're underfunded. We know where that goes. We know where that money goes. Until we recognize who it is that we are up against in all of these battles, the man who took $3.5 billion from special interests and then has the gall to tell people that they're defending an industry that's not looking for anything from the state to be left alone, this is the battle that we're in. And I'm afraid that until we recognize who we are up against, we're not going to strike the root of these problems. We'll continue to deal with the symptoms. We'll talk about all these things while those people up there run around with a stranglehold and a boot on the taxpayer's neck. That's what I see happening in Pennsylvania, and we're seeing the states that are addressing this, they're reversing course. They're starting to address these problems. They're able to move their state forward rather than always talking about how do we not fall into the abyss, because that's where we've been. Now, with that, let me tell you why I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged because I'll tell you what, it was in 2003, probably about this time of the year, we were sitting in this very room with a very different leadership than what you saw at the rostrum this morning. They told us that they made a huge mistake in 1991 and that they would not be doing that again of raising taxes in order to fill this budget deficit. Well, it was about 6 months later that they were there pulling the lever for increasing the personal income tax, borrowing billions of dollars, and letting Ed Rendell run roughshod over Pennsylvania for 8 years. I think you heard it from Senator Corman. It's a different day, and I believe it. I see it in the people that are now standing firm on these issues. Now, I hope I don't have to eat my words that come December where they're pulling the lever. I see a different dynamic of the people that we have put into office. I asked this question for a lot of folks to see what kind of response they get. I came here in 2002, and since that time we've had 6 elections to have legislative turnover. What percentage of the legislature do you believe is turned over in those 6 elections? I'll take one person, one guess. What percentage? What do you think, Reese? What percentage? I'm putting you on the spot. 30%. 77% of the people that were here in 2002 are gone. It is a dynamic that has changed the way the culture is operating up there. That's what encourages me. They're starting to take on the people that are putting Pennsylvania in a vice grip, that we could break free, that we can be the Wisconsins and the Michigans and the Indianas, the places where they're starting to get on the right track. That's why I'm encouraged. That's why I hope that folks will continue to press forward with
You
our
know,
elected
that is a
officials
true
there.
statement. I remember sitting next to Matt in that meeting in 2003, young guy, brand new to
Had hair.
Pennsylvania. He was so optimistic, and oh, I remember how your spirits were dashed, and you've been cynical ever since.
On that note, let me just end by saying that, yes, we are seeing leadership that is standing up for what we've been advocating. It's going to get very, very rough on them over the coming months. The governor likely will follow through on his veto threat. When he does that, all of his friends in the mainstream news media, the labor unions, all the spending interests are going to start attacking our guys for having stood up for the taxpayers. And that's where all of us have to engage to make sure that we go out and tell our side of the story and to have their backs, because we've been critical when they haven't done what we've wanted. Now that they're doing what we want, we have to stand behind them and make sure that, in fact, they're able to hold the fort all the way through to the end of the process. So with that, Gene Barr, Matt Briette, Kevin Shivers, Dave Taylor, thank you very much. One final note on your calendar for 2016, circle in big bright red April 1 and 2, that is the 2016 Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. We should have a quarterly briefing again in the fall, but we want to keep April 1st and 2nd on your calendars. That's the, well, yes, it's April Fool's Day. There's no truth to the rumor that Hillary Clinton will be the featured speaker this year as a result of that. So thank you all very much for being here. Appreciate it.
We want Bernie anyway.
You want Bernie Sanders, that's who we'll go for.